wanted to find the greatest mathematician alive, you went to Baghdad. If you wanted the best surgeon, the most advanced astronomer, the sharpest philosopher, Baghdad. If you wanted to read Aristotle, Plato, or Euclid, you didn't go to Athens or Rome or Alexandria. Those cities were ruins. You went to Baghdad. At a time when the best libraries in Europe held a few dozen books, one scholar in Baghdad refused to accept a job in another city because it would have taken 400 camels just to move his personal book collection. 400 camels of books that he owned personally. For roughly 500 years, from the mid-700s to the mid-1200s, the Islamic world produced an era of scientific, philosophical, and cultural achievement so total, so dense, and so consequential that the modern world you are living in right now is built on its foundations. Your algebra, your surgery, your camera, your understanding of how your own eye works, your coffee. All of it traces a direct line back to a golden age that most of the world has never been properly taught about. This is the story of the Islamic Golden Age, and it begins with a city that was, for a moment in history, the most extraordinary place human beings have ever built. In 762 AD, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur chose a site on the Tigris River in what is now Iraq and built the city from nothing. He called it Medinat al-Salam, the city of peace. The world would come to know it as Baghdad. The design was unlike anything that had ever been built. Baghdad was a perfect circle, a round city divided into 4 equal quadrants, with the caliph's palace and the great mosque at its exact center. The circular layout wasn't just architectural, it was a statement. Every road in every direction led to the same place, the center of power, the center of the world. The Abbasid caliphs who built Baghdad were not simply rulers. They were patrons of knowledge on a scale that had never existed before. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid, whose court you may recognize from the stories of 1001 Nights, filled his palace with scholars, poets, musicians, and scientists. He didn't just tolerate knowledge. He funded it, competed for it, and collected it the way other rulers collected gold. His son, al-Mamun, went further.
He reportedly received Greek scientific texts as part of a peace treaty with the Byzantine Empire and immediately set his scholars to work translating them. He commissioned a team of geographers to measure the circumference of the Earth. The ancient Greeks had estimated it. Al-Mamun's scholars measured it. Their result was accurate to within a fraction of a percent in the 9th century. At the heart of this intellectual empire sat an institution that historians still argue about, which is itself a sign of how extraordinary it was. It was called Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. What exactly was the House of Wisdom? Depending on which historian you ask, it was either a royal library, a translation bureau, a full research academy, or all 3 simultaneously at different points in its existence. The debate about its exact form and function is real, but what nobody disputes is what happened inside it. Caliph al-Mamun paid translators by the weight of their completed manuscripts in gold. Let that sink in. If you translated a book that weighed 1 kilogram, you received 1 kilogram of gold in payment. The translation of knowledge was funded at a rate that made it one of the most lucrative professions in the medieval world. Some estimates suggest the total investment in this translation movement was equivalent to twice the annual research budget of the UK's Medical Research Council, in today's money. The scholars who gathered at the House of Wisdom were Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian. They spoke Arabic, Persian, Syriac, Greek, and Sanskrit. The most celebrated translator, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, was a Nestorian Christian who translated over 260 works and whose salary, historians estimate, was equivalent to a modern professional athlete.
He translated so much that he essentially invented academic Arabic, creating the technical vocabulary that allowed the language to express complicated scientific and philosophical ideas for the first time. But the House of Wisdom wasn't just a translation service, it was a launchpad. The scholars who read the ancient texts didn't stop there. They went beyond them, and what they built is the reason we are having this conversation right now. Number 1. Al-Khwarizmi, the man who gave you algebra. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi was a Persian mathematician, appointed as the head of the House of Wisdom's library around 820 AD. He wrote a book called Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, which roughly translates as the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. The word al-Jabr in that title, the Arabic term for the operation of moving a term from one side of an equation to the other, became, when the book was translated into Latin, the word we use today, algebra. Every equation you have ever solved, every x you have ever found, traces directly to this man in this library in 9th century Baghdad. The word algorithm, the foundation of all modern computing, comes from the Latinization of his own name. Al-Khwarizmi became algorithmi. Algorithmi became algorithm. Your phone, your laptop, every piece of software ever written owes its name to a scholar in the House of Wisdom. 2. Ibn al-Haytham, the man who explained vision itself. Before Ibn al-Haytham, the dominant theory of vision, endorsed by Euclid, Plato, and most of the ancient world, was that the eye emits rays of light that travel outward and touch objects, and that's how we see. The eye as a projector, not a receiver. Ibn al-Haytham, working in the 10th and 11th centuries, locked himself in a darkened room with a small hole in one wall, the first camera obscura, and proved that this was wrong. Light travels into the eye receives it, the brain processes it. Vision happens in the mind, not in the air between you and the object. Number 3. al-Zahrawi, the father of surgery. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in Europe as al-Bukhasis, wrote a 30-volume medical encyclopedia in 10th century Cordoba called al-Tasrif. Volume 30 was a surgical manual that contained detailed descriptions of over 200 surgical instruments, many of which he designed himself. Forceps, syringes, retractors, surgical catgut for internal stitches. Al-Tasrif remained the primary surgical reference text in European medical schools for over 500 years. Surgeons in 15th century Europe were still being trained on diagrams drawn by a 10th century Andalusian physician. The techniques used in modern surgery to this day, the use of dissolving sutures, the systematic approach to wound closure, trace back to this one book. 4. Al-Jazari, the father of engineering and robotics. Ismail al-Jazari worked as a chief engineer in the Artukid court of Diyarbakir in the 12th century. In 1206, he published the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, a catalog of 50 mechanical contraptions he had designed and built, accompanied by detailed technical illustrations. Among his inventions, the crankshaft, the device that converts rotational motion to linear motion that is fundamental to every internal combustion engine ever built. The double-acting reciprocating piston pump, the basis of all modern pumps, and a programmable automaton, a mechanical boat carrying 4 robotic musicians that could be programmed to play different rhythms by repositioning pegs in a rotating drum, a programmable robot. In 1206, the contributions of the Islamic Golden Age aren't just historical footnotes, they are structural. They are in the architecture of the modern world in ways that most people have never been told. Coffee. The first documented use of coffee as a drink came from Yemen in the 15th century, spread through the coffee houses of Istanbul and Cairo, the intellectual gathering places that functioned for the wider public as what the House of Wisdom was for scholars. The coffeehouse culture of the Islamic world is the direct ancestor of the European cafe, and the European cafe is where the Enlightenment was largely argued into existence. Paper mills. Muslims learned papermaking from the Chinese and built the first paper mills in Baghdad by 793 AD, more than 400 years before paper manufacturing reached Europe. By the 13th century, Baghdad had 36 libraries and over 100 booksellers. The mass availability of cheap paper made the translation movement possible. Without it, no books, no House of Wisdom, no algebra, no optics, no surgery manual, no algorithm. The scientific method itself, the practice of forming a hypothesis and testing it through controlled observation and experiment, rather than simply reasoning from first principles, was first clearly articulated and practiced by scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. The ancient Greeks reasoned brilliantly. the scholars of Baghdad tested. That shift, from argument to experiment, is the foundation of all modern science. In 1258, the Mongol army of Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, arrived at the walls of Baghdad. The Caliph al-Mustasim negotiated. It didn't work. On February 13, 1258, the Mongols entered the city. What followed was one of the most catastrophic single events in the history of human civilization. The Mongols killed the Caliph, slaughtered somewhere between 200,000 and 800,000 people, and burned the city. The palaces, the hospitals, the mosques, all destroyed. The irrigation systems that had supported the region's agriculture for thousands of years, smashed. And the House of Wisdom, all of it, thrown into the Tigris River. The Islamic world did not disappear after 1258. Scholarship continued, in Cairo, in Anatolia, in Persia, in Al-Andalus. The Golden Age had never been only Baghdad. But the destruction of Baghdad was a wound from which the particular brilliance of that era never fully recovered. The specific alchemy of that city, the caliphs who paid translators in gold, the scholars from a dozen civilizations working in the same building, the extraordinary concentration of minds at the exact moment when the ancient world's knowledge met a civilization hungry enough to test it. That specific moment was gone. And in its absence, much of the knowledge the House of Wisdom had preserved, translated from Greek, from Sanskrit, from Persian, flowed westward. European scholars in Spain and Sicily, working from Arabic manuscripts, retranslated the texts into Latin. The Renaissance, the rebirth of classical learning in Europe, was, in significant part, the rediscovery of knowledge that had been preserved in Arabic by the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. Europe did not emerge from the Dark Ages on its own. It was handed a lamp. The scholars who gathered in Baghdad were Persian and Arab and Greek and Jewish and Christian and Zoroastrian. They translated the knowledge of India, Greece, Persia, Egypt, and China. They tested it, corrected it, extended it, and passed it forward. They didn't ask whether knowledge belonged to their civilization. They asked whether it was true. Every time you solve an equation, you are using al-Khwarizmi's language. Every time a surgeon closes a wound with dissolving sutures, they are using al-Zahrawi's technique. Every time a camera captures light, they are building on Ibn al-Haytham's understanding of vision. Every time a machine converts rotation into motion, al-Jazari's crankshaft is turning inside it. The Golden Age didn't end. It transformed. It became the world. We just stopped telling the story of where it came from. Baghdad was, for a moment, the capital of the entire world, not because of armies, because of ideas. And the ideas never died, they just lost their address. If this changed how you think about where the modern world came from, subscribe. Because we are building a channel around the histories that didn't make it into the textbooks. And there are many more. Drop a comment. Which of these scholars or inventions surprised you most? Because I have a feeling it's going to be the crankshaft.